Hello and welcome to another video, and today is the 24th of September, and I've been on a little bit of a hiatus for 2 days, but I'm back now. I will not upload anything until Tuesday the 27th, so by then the referendum will already be over, and I'm sure that there will be some updates, but I'm going to do this one update right before I take another break. So it's going to be just a general frontline summary today and go over some of the stuff that occurred over the past 3 or so days. So, over here in the Andriivka Bridgehead, we did receive news of the Ukrainians withdrawing from their forward positions around Stepove, Chaklove, Vishneve, due to heavy Russian artillery strikes and airstrikes, especially on the area around Suki Stavak. At this point, the towns of Bijimine and Slavslive are in a gray zone, also Kostromka. And Ukraine, they've sent a lot of their troops from the 46th Brigade back to Andriivka Lozove to just replenish their forces after suffering some pretty heavy losses over the past few days. Any sort of breakthrough over here is going to be very difficult at this point, and I think Ukraine has sort of abandoned any sort of hopes of advancing significantly here. But I do think that they want to keep the bridgehead over here for future operations, not necessarily in the short term, but maybe later on they could use this as a bridgehead to conduct attacks, which is why they have restored the crossings, the river crossings that had previously flooded, using their sapper brigades. And all of those crossings, they're being hit pretty heavily by Russian artillery and their air force. But as of now, the crossings are operational, although this can change, and it also means that there's a very tentative supply line, which is a big threat to whatever troops are situated on the bridgehead. A lot of them might be cut off in the event that the crossings are destroyed again. So that is certainly a problem that Ukraine will have to deal with for a while now. But again, no real changes besides that on the Kherson front line. Everything is very stable over there. In Zaporizhzhia, we did see a lot of shelling from both sides. Ukraine heavily shelled Enerhadar, and they sent some kamikaze drones over there. Meanwhile, Russia, over the past 3 days, they've been launching some major strikes on the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. I have the coordinates over here and all the sites labeled. So they hit the refractory plant in the north, the radio transmission center in the center, and the Sunrise Hotel, which was being used for foreign mercenaries. This electrical substation, which was targeted, there was a video of it, and you could see that there was some pretty big damage, which caused power outages in Zaporizhzhia itself. Also, this volunteer center further south was also struck. So clearly there has been an increase in the strikes on Zaporizhzhia, but in terms of frontline news, not much occurred in Zaporizhzhia. The only thing that is notable from this area is that some Ukrainian recon units attempted to infiltrate towards the city Polohi. They were stopped according to the Russian sources and quote unquote neutralized, but it seems as if besides that nothing has really occurred. Taking Polohi would actually be pretty good for Ukraine in terms of advancing Zaporizhzhia. That's probably their goal at the moment because it's on this road over here. If they can advance along these open fields and reconquer these two towns, then they would be pretty close to actually taking Polohi itself, which is important as a junction between all of these other cities around here like Tokmak or Vasilivka, all these cities on the front line. So it is an important city, but it won't be falling anytime soon, especially with events going on elsewhere. In the Pesky area, not much news to report on. I really haven't changed the map over here in so long, just because Ukraine keeps on sending in their reserve units to launch attacks over here, and they did that again over the past 2 days, which is really stalling any sort of Russian advance. So the DPR and Russian forces, they've just been on a defensive posture for the past few weeks. But once the Ukrainian reserves run out of fuel for their counterattacks, which have been unsuccessful. We haven't really seen anything change, just besides the fact that Russia hasn't advanced. But eventually, they're going to have to stop with these incessant counteroffensives, and then we'll probably see again the push towards Opitny and Vodiane, where the Ukrainian General Staff reports on a lot of Russian assaults every single day. Now let's move on to the situation around Bakhmut, where we do actually have some news that I can talk about. So, Zovanka is now apparently fully under the control of the DPR, at least according to the DPR defense ministry. They showed a map which showed that they control the area, but the thing is, a lot of the pro-Russia maps, they still show that these blocks over here that I'm highlighting in yellow, they're still under Ukrainian control technically. And this is still part of Zovanka itself, so it hasn't actually fully fallen. It will fully fall once Ukraine withdraws to the west of this road over here, which leads from Mayorsk to Bakhmut. But at least a chunk of Zovanka has been taken, and I'm going to highlight that area, which was taken by the DPR forces over here. So Zaporizhzhia, it was really a major battlefield during the Donbass War, where it was divided between DPR and Ukrainian control, which is why it is very heavily fortified, and you have a lot of defensive fortifications, especially around here in the center of the town. But the town sort of extends all the way up north to here, so you still have some roads and streets that are technically under Ukrainian control, but I would say it's more of a gray zone at this point. Eventually they will withdraw, but that has not happened yet. You do see there are several like trench lines around here that could be utilized to extend the defensive operations on this line, but clearly it's a goal of the DPR forces to fully take control of this region that's east of the red line, and then actually push into Oskil, where Ukraine, their general staff, they always report on like every single day now of assaults on Kordiumivka and Oskil. And that probably comes from Mykolaievka Druha. They also report on assaults on Odradivka, which is just like a mile away from Mykolaievka. So clearly it's being assaulted right now. There are clashes on the outskirts, the southern outskirts, but it's not that big of a town, and in the grand scheme of things, it is actually important because you could see a Russian advance along here, along this road over here, from Odradivka, and then they'd actually be partially encircling Zaporizhzhia, where right now the fighting in Zaporizhzhia is really going on around the outskirts with the Wagner units fighting over there. But Wagner, they've sort of like stretched out their forces now because they're focusing a lot on Bakhmut specifically, but also on the Seversk front, and I'll get into that in a second. But yeah, nothing really notable besides what I mentioned. Not that much of a change in the front lines. But we did actually have some changes around Bakhmut for the first time in a while, because the line of fighting was really around this eastern part of Patrice Lumumba Street. But since then, the Wagner troops have been able to break through, and proof of this is that Ukraine actually blew up the final bridge that was standing between the east and west parts of Bakhmut. So we have a photo here that I linked. So this was just used for like transporting heavy equipment. So now that can't be moved around anymore. Troops can probably still like traverse the river because it's not that deep and it's very thin. So that's not the problem, but it does imply that Ukraine has started to withdraw their tanks and their infantry fighting vehicles and their artillery from the eastern part of Bakhmut. It's possible that they still have some like infantry units situated in this residential area, because we don't have any proof that Russia is actually in this area. So in all likelihood, the fighting is still going on around there. But clearly the Wagner group has been able to break through. There are some reports from the pro-Russian sources that the fighting has reached the art winery over here, and that it was actually taken. Here's the facility itself. But there's no real proof in terms of like geolocations. I couldn't find any geolocations or any footage of Wagner in the art winery, and it's been claimed many times that the art winery was under Wagner. But anyway, this does imply a change in the front lines for the first time in a while in Bakhmut. So we'll have to also see if they start leaving their positions around Pitorodny and all these other parts of Bakhmut to the east of the Bakhmutovka River, because there clearly is a like nearly half of the city is on the eastern side, so they would be giving up a lot of land. Although most of the residential, dense urban areas are on the western side, so that's probably where you're going to see most of the Ukrainian defenses. But that's more in the future. For now, we have some reports of a Ukrainian assault towards Brestove, which was repulsed by Wagner troops, which also does show that the Wagner group has been moved towards the Seversk front. They first tried to stabilize the front line after Bilohorivka fell, and they're fighting around Spirny. They're also around Brestove, clearly, and they were able to stop the Ukrainian assault. The 10th Ukrainian Assault Brigade conducted the attack, but again, they got pushed back anyway. Most of the Seversk front is just static. The main point of interest for us is the Liman front right now, because there were a lot of changes over here that I will be going over. So first of all, Ukraine has really consolidated their control over the bridgehead over here, just to the north of the Donets River. They're actually pushing towards Yampil, which is in a very precarious situation at the moment. The line of demarcation is around this road over here, but you do have the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade, which is pushing towards the town Yampil. Although Yampil is pretty well defended by forests and lakes, you do have very small units that are entering and harassing the Russian troops in here. So there is a good chance that this entire area just falls to Ukraine in the future. Same thing with Dubrova and to a lesser extent Crimea, because these two towns, they're really defended at the moment just by this forested area. But you do have some Ukrainian sabotage groups which are now pushing into here, and they're attacking Russian positions in this area. But for the most part, this area is still under Russian control. The places that aren't under Russian control are now all this area to the north of the Donets River, including the national park over here, where Russia has probably left their positions. It is more of sort of a gray area. You don't really have that many troops from either side in this area. And you also have an amusement park over here, which was contested. We do know that Liman is still under Russian control, but look at it. It's over here being assaulted from the south. Meanwhile, it's being attacked from the north from Dvorichne. And there's conflicting reports about what's going on in Dvorichne. Some Ukrainian sources claim that it is fully under their control, while others say that it's contested still. There's really no way to know because we don't have any official confirmation of the situation there, but I would just keep it as contested for now. Same thing with Novoselivka. This town has been contested for a few days now, and if it were to fall, then the fighting would move on to Darilove. But then from there wouldn't really be that many towns in the way of actually almost encircling Liman, because the next town would be Stavki, where you do have a Russian garrison. But imagine Ukraine was able to reach this deep in. They would basically be encircling Liman from three sides. And the only escape route for the troops situated in Liman, which are from the Bar 16 unit, which is a reserve force, they'd have to leave from this road over here towards Torske and Dvorichne. They could potentially withdraw from here towards Yampil, but Yampil is also under threat of being captured. So this is really the one area that they'd be able to withdraw from. They still could probably withdraw from this road over here, but this is sort of complicated given the fact that Dvorichne is contested. And Dvorichne itself, the Bar's 13 unit, is fighting in there, and they are trying their best to hold the line at the moment. The next Russian defensive line, if Liman falls, would have to be around these different ponds or lakes over here, around Dvorichne, Torske. This is probably where they are going to send the remnants of the 1st Guards tank army if this entire area were to fall. And you might see the entirety of the DPR region in the north, the northern DPR area, actually falling at this point. Another area where the Ukrainians were able to break through was around Oleksandrivka and Krimiki, Krovyar, Yatskivka, Robitsi, and finally Lozove. So they were able to reach the border between the Donetsk and Kharkiv oblasts. So now their push is towards this town over here, Pesky, Radkivsky, where the fighting has been going on for a day or so. The longer term goals would be to reach first Pidliman and then Borova, which is one of the larger cities in this area, which has been under Russian control for a while. It was heavily fought over during the April Donbass campaign, and now it might actually be taken back because they're only about 10 miles away from the town. You did have some reconnaissance units operating in these forested areas just to the west of Borova, but it seems as if they're not able to actually take the town just yet. Russian sources have been reporting that they are forming this new defensive line from Derilove to Karpivka, and that Ukraine has been assaulting the Russian lines around the Karpivka and also Ridukub for the past few days, and that they've been unsuccessful at breaking through. So that's really the situation over here. We will have to wait and see if Liman is actually encircled. If not, then it would become one of those like Izium situations wherein most of the forces are able to withdraw on time, but they'd have to like abandon a lot of their heavy equipment. So that's something that's totally a possibility now. In terms of the Oskil front, we haven't seen that many changes, but there has been heightened artillery duels in recent days. You have specifically in Kupiansk Ukrainian units crossing the river. So I would say this entire area is a gray zone at the moment. The goal of the Ukrainians at the moment is to push towards this town over here called Petropavlivka. If they can reach Petropavlivka, they really don't have that many towns in the way. They can push very deep into Russian territory. They can probably go another, say, 6-7 miles into Russian controlled territory without much resistance if they were able to take Petropavlivka. And then they could also turn further south and assault some other key Russian hubs, which are filled with civilians and a lot of Russian military equipment. So they would be able to take a large population area, specifically Kupiansk, Vuzlovi. This is basically like a suburb of Kupiansk, and it could be taken if the Russians are expelled from this entire area just on the east of the Oskil River. And then from there, they can go further south and expel Russia from all these towns that are along the road from Borova to Kupiansk, and that would be a major defeat, and it would cause them to have to withdraw even further deeper, leaving all of Kharkiv Oblast and pushing back into Lugansk Oblast, where they would be fighting around Svatove, which has been targeted recently by HIMARS. Ukraine has started using HIMARS again at a heightened level, specifically on territories within the LPR control, so like Svatove, as I mentioned, but also some other towns that are pretty deep in, like Starobielsk over here, and Alkevsk. That's another one. Interestingly, Lysychansk was also targeted, and Rubizhny. So there is a lot of strikes going on deeper into Russian controlled territory due to the retreat from the positions in Kharkov Oblast from a few weeks ago. Now, another area where we have a breakthrough for Ukraine was around here, near this town called Dvorichna. So you had the Ukrainians, specifically the 14th Brigade and the 92nd Brigade, crossing the river around a few days ago. They took over Dvorichne over here, which has a few warehouses with Russian equipment, and they're fighting around Hryaniikivka and Horobivka. Most of the fierce clashes were occurring around Tavilzhanka, so now there's a lot of conflicting reports as to what's going on around here. Some Ukrainian sources are saying that they're able to break through around here and that they're on the cusp of taking the town, but I did also read right before recording this video from some of the pro-Russian sources that they actually retook Tavyljanka. So they do have a crossing over here that they used to enter the Russian-controlled territory. So the whatever crossing was set up was around here. Russia says that they struck the area, but clearly there's continued fighting to the east of the river over here. And this is a big liability for Russia because if Ukraine is able to hold on to this bridgehead over here, they can then push further south along this road over here, take over Liman, Sinkivka, these two towns over here, forcing Russia out of this area, and then actually reaching Petropavlivka from the north, from the north, as well as from the west. So there would be a two-pronged attack on Petropavlivka, which would overwhelm the forces of the Russians in this area. And then really the next line would be around here. I'm drawing it in red. So that's a big liability, which is why Russia has been pouring in a lot of artillery and a lot of aviation into this area, and they have been striking Ukrainians incessantly. They report that the Ukrainians have suffered very high casualties in this area, especially the 14th Brigade, which lost one battalion, and they were having to like transfer troops out, and there's been a lot of deaths, at least according to Russia. The Russian sources that I read said that the bridgehead over here was actually set up by like 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers. If that is the case, then it's a pretty large grouping that's situated in this area. So that's something to look out for, because if they're able to hold the line, it could have some serious ramifications for the rest of the front line. Now, the last thing I want to mention is the fact that the referendums have been going on now for a few days. It started on the 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. And on the 22nd, it was reported by the Russian sources that there was actually some pretty high turnout. So I'm getting these numbers just from the first day of the referendums. But since then, there has been a lot of voting, so the numbers are obviously different. But what's being said is that on the first day of referendums, the turnout was 23.64% in DPR, 21.97% in LPR. In Zaporizhzhia, it was 20.52%, and in Kherson, it was 15.31%. So that makes pretty good sense because you would expect higher enthusiasm in the Donbass territories and a little bit less enthusiasm from Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. But this all comes as Russia is starting their mobilization. Most of the forces from the mobilization will not be sent to the front lines to fight, just due to the fact that a lot of them are older, some of them haven't been trained in a while. So really, they're going to act as rear guards situated in the new territories that will be annexed by Russia in a few weeks. And that will help the current Russian army, which is fighting, because first of all, they'll have better logistical situation. They'll also be able to send more forces in to fight on the front line. They won't have to worry about a lack of coordination. So it will free up a lot of Russian troops that are currently in a pretty bad situation, trying to defend the line in some pretty tough areas. So this will take a while, though. And in the meantime, Ukraine is just sending in whatever forces they have left in order to push through, specifically in Liman and in some other areas. They want to make sure they have as many gains as possible before the Russians send in their reinforcements. So that's what we're seeing now. And that's all I have to say. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.